Buckle up, because today we are all about roads and cars. As you can see, I am a highly qualified civil engineer, construction foreman, architect person, and can be trusted with safely planning public roadways and construction sites. Worst part is, this probably is in fact better than most Midwestern construction zones. Anyway, this Sharpie jig here cost the taxpayers of my 4x8 table a pretty penny, but it has accurately, more or less, measured the width of a 1 to 48 county blacktop, approximately 5 inches across. With this outline in place, all the chalk that had been dusting up the table could be wiped clean. Now, just as there are a number of road surfaces in real life, there's a number of ways to go when it comes to paving roads for a train layout, and you might be wondering which one I've chosen. And honestly, it's a method I've never seen used before, so I may be so bold as to say it's a new method I've come up with. As you can see, I'm taping off the area to be paved, so it is something liquid that is brushed on, but it's not just a coat of black paint or a thin layer of plaster. During a routine stop at the hardware store, as I was walking past the automotive section, I noticed a can of brush-on truck bedliner. And I immediately and fondly recalled the days of my old Ford Ranger, which also had a spray-on bedliner. But more so, I thought about the bumpy texture and black color and thought, could this perhaps be a convincing and economic way to pave asphalt roads? I watched some customer videos for the brand I was looking at, and the surface looked like the right amount of texture without being too bumpy, so I picked up the can for somewhere between $20 and $30. Brushing it on is pretty easy, it just takes some time to smooth out all the brush strokes and get an even texture. But for now, I'll let that dry and turn my attention to another important part of the roads. For the grade crossings, I used some hobby plywood like the planks you can get at Hobby Lobby, and cut them down to a size where I could rest them against the profile of the tubular track. And while I was at the saw, I cut some smaller strips that will rest inside the rails for vehicles to drive over. I used some dark stain I had on hand to get that nice creosote effect. And while those dried, I screwed the grades into place and then filled in the track with ballast underneath for the stained wood strips to rest on. Now, as you saw before, the grade crossings are not flush at all with the table, and here is where another road paving method comes into play. In order to smooth out the space between the corner of the grade and the table, I lobbed on some hefty amounts of joint compound and spread it around, knowing full well that it will probably crack and need patched after its first drying time. Maybe I should just leave the cracks in the road to be true to life. At this point, there was wet stain, wet joint compound, and wet bed liner that needed to all dry, and so in order to accelerate the process, or at least pretend to, like most road work, I put a tower fan on the table to keep air moving over everything. Later that evening, though, I came out while the bed liner was still a little tacky. I touched up a couple spots for a more even texture, and then began the extraordinarily satisfying work of removing the tape. It's important to do so while the bed liner is still somewhat wet, lest the tape just get stuck underneath the bed liner. That's one thing to consider about this stuff. Once it goes on, it's staying on. And while the can was open, I paved one side of one grade crossing, and even got the wood planks installed inside the rails. The look, even with the big tubular track, is quite convincing, I think. And check out this texture too. I was so happy with how this method has turned out so far. It does dry just as glossy as when it goes on, so it will require a coat of black paint. The problem is, wet paint is also just as shiny as the present surface, so it turned into a memory game of where I had or had not painted. And now it's really starting to look like an asphalt surface. Some nooks and crannies still need touched up with paint, though now it's much easier to see where it's needed. After doing touch-ups, I reassembled the siding with a milk platform and, as always, checked to make sure everything still worked. If you don't learn anything else from this series, at least just learn to always, always, always test everything whenever it's been disassembled and reassembled before moving on. And joining the saga of moving things around to what is definitely going to be its new permanent place is this signal. Truth be told, I was just tired of hitting it whenever I'd reach across the table, and I wanted it in a spot with more visibility and use. With the siding back in place, I made the final grade crossing that would go over the siding, though I wasn't quite ready to get it set permanently. Until today. I couldn't screw the grade crossing in place or put down the joint compound because I was awaiting the arrival of this icing station, which would tell me for sure where the road would go for proper clearance. After getting it wired up, I gave it a test in which it certainly worked, but magnificently failed. But, like most accessories, it was a matter of simply reducing the voltage to around 12 volts for the Iceman to gently push a block of ice into the refrigerator car. Now that the icing station was in place, I finished the grade crossing by getting it secured, flush with the table with the good pink plaster, and paved over with bedliner. Another side note on the bedliner is that if you can do all your paving in one day, the better. I noticed that with each passing use, the can was harder and harder to open, and there was a thick, dried layer that formed every time on the surface inside. And it just happened that while I was working on this project, there was a flea market in White Cloud, Kansas that I was able to go to with some family. And while I was there, I found a booth with tables upon tables of 1 to 52 scale cars, which I gladly picked a few up from to go on the layout. A red, yellow, blue, and pink one, and a neat old-timey truck. But they would have to stay parked in the lot while I finished painting the main road. And then lastly, it was time to put some stripes on. Admittedly, I had no idea how I was going to do this with the bumpy texture, so I just started trying something by using the thin edge of a foam brush to stamp the white stripe on. It's not perfect, but when a train rolls over, it sure does look pretty good. But as I considered the curves of the road, the straight edge of the brush was not going to cut it, nor was I even likely to stamp at a consistent thickness each time. So I opted to tape off the edges, careful to get as tight to the bumpy surface as possible. After carefully painting inside the tape with white paint, I removed the tape and, to no surprise, found some blemishes here and there. Some were minute, some egregious, but nothing that a little touch-up wouldn't solve. And that's all for now. What, you thought I would conclude this video with a nice, finished paved road, a construction site, a work zone that would be tidied up on time? I would never bring such dishonor to the customs of my homeland. Stay tuned for part 2, where maybe, just maybe, the road work will come to an end. Thanks for watching.